Member Maggie Barry.
I move the question be now put.
It's getting close, but not enough. I'm going to call Holly Walker.
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to those honourable members for supporting me in taking a call on the title and commencement of this bill. I've tried to take a call in part 1 and I've tried to take a call in part 2, and I'm very pleased that I finally get to take one, Mr. Chair, on the title and commencement. And what is the title of this bill, Mr. Chair? The Mixed Ownership Model Bill, MOM, MOM. Isn't it appropriate? Motherhood and apple pie. What a lovely euphemistic title the government has come up with for this bill. And isn't it appropriate that that euphemistic title, that misleading title, which disguises the true purpose of this bill, which is the sale of public assets, should have the word mom in it, when we've heard so much about the mum and dad investors, those mythical mum and dad investors who are going to benefit from the sale of state assets that will result from this bill. Apparently, that's who is going to benefit, Mr. Chair. But we know that this will not be the case. We know two things. We know that 95% of New Zealanders will not be purchasing shares in these assets when they are sold. And we also know that 100% of New Zealanders already own these assets, Mr. Chair. They are public assets and they are owned by every mum and dad, and also every mum and every dad and every other kind of New Zealander already owns these assets, Mr. Chair. So I think a better title for the bill would be the Privatisation of Public Assets Bill, because that is what it does. It has nothing to do with mums and dads, or moms, or Americanisms, or euphemistic, misleading titles, Mr. Chair. It is simply the privatisation of public assets. But speaking of mums and dads, and speaking of families, Mr. Chair, I want to bring a young person's perspective into this debate, something which has been somewhat lacking, I feel, so far. And I want to talk about the intergenerational impacts of this bill, because it's not just about mums and dads, it's also about children, it's about grandparents, and it's about the intergenerational impacts of this bill. And for that reason, I suggest another alternative title, which is the Intergenerational Inequity Bill, Mr. Chair. And I want to speak briefly to an SOP which is on the table in the name of my co-leader here, Russell Norman. SOP number 70, which talks about the commencement and delaying the commencement of this bill, making it ineligible to receive the royal assent until such time as the country has held an indicative referendum on the question of whether the public supports the sale of state assets. Because, Mr. Chair, I have been out collecting signatures for this petition, for the citizens-initiated referendum, for this referendum, and I can tell you some very interesting intergenerational trends in the people who have been stopping to sign that petition, sir, because I have found in my experience out on the streets of Wellington collecting those signatures that there are two types of people who are very likely to stop and sign, and those are older people, Mr. Chair, and they are young people. And I think that that shows and it demonstrates the intergenerational impacts of this bill, and the fact that opposition to the sale of state assets bridges the gap of generations. And indeed you can see that in the fact that both Grey Power and the New Zealand Union of Students Associations are two of the core coalition members who are organising and campaigning for this petition. Mr. Chair, when I talk to the older generation when they stop to sign this petition, they talk about having seen the mistakes of the 1980s and 90s, having seen the damaging consequences of the sale of state assets for the whole country, economically, socially, for consumers at the household level, and for the nation at the government level and at the country level. And they say to me, Mr. Chair, don't make the same mistake again. Don't make the same mistake twice. That is what the older New Zealanders are saying to us and to the parliamentarians in this House and to the government. Don't make the same mistake again. And that's why it should be called the Intergenerational Inequity Bill. And then when I talk to younger New Zealanders, people like me, Mr Chair, I was born in 1982. I grew up in a New Zealand that was fundamentally shaped and changed by the sale of state assets in the 1980s and 90s and by the neoliberal economic policies of that time. And my generation and the generations younger than me are daring to imagine, in fact, that we might not have to make the same mistakes again, that we might be able to do it differently, that we might be able to put up an alternative vision. Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair.
Member Tim
Mr. Chair.
McIndoe.
I move that the